seek to bring together subject experts and social partners for open discussions about the different aspects of the just transition. And today, the first dialogue, we will investigate how the just transition can promote gender equality, social inclusion, and support the participation of women in the opportunities of a more sustainable economy. I am Bali Baduza, Commissioner at the PCC, and I will be facilitating today's dialogue. So South Africa is set on a path to transition to a low carbon and climate resilient society. However, socioeconomic challenges, including unemployment, poverty, and inequality, will hamper this transition, undoubtedly, if not addressed. Like death and taxes, there is another certainty, and that is climate change exacerbates existing inequalities and increases the vulnerability of certain groups, such as women, the marginalized, and underrepresented populations, to gender-based violence, poverty, starvation, and other injustices. So there is no question as to why we need a gender-responsive climate strategy, not only that has the ability to reduce gender inequality, but also alleviate and empower women as climate leaders. The question for today, or the questions for today, is how and who. It is important that we be specific and practical as much as we can. And luckily, we have 8 esteemed panelists who will help us navigate and clarify the how and the who. We need to move from the discourse of intention to implementation. Each panelist will have 5 minutes to make introductory remarks before we open up for discussion. So our first panelist today is Ayanda Mvimbi. Ayanda is a strategic development leader with extensive program management experience. Ayanda has more than 25 years of experience as a development professional, including 10 years with United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and Women Empowerment. Ayanda, over to you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Baduza. I hope I am audible. So I just want to start by really thanking you for this timely roundtable that you have organized. And also just to mention that, in fact, on Monday, the UN, led by UN Women and UNEP, we hosted a roundtable on harnessing the gender dividend in accelerating just transitions. And this particular roundtable was for us to really explore what are the transformative solutions to harness the power of women's agency and leadership in this debate, as well as design solutions that will ensure that women participate and benefit from ongoing transitions in multiple sectors. So with our mandate of being a global champion on women's rights, UN Women is cognizant of the fact that the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals is pivotal in all of this. And our work aimed at ensuring Sustainable Development Goal number 5 takes center stage alongside various critical SDGs, including on climate action, affordable and clean energy, decent work, and economic growth. So what I want to start by stating is the issue of the context, because the context is very important. We are having this conversation today in a context where we already have a climate crisis, and the various transitions poses threats, but also opportunities. And threats are linked to life, livelihoods, health, safe and security for women and girls. But also we have opportunities to turn the tide and do the right things. And if you look at the indicators in terms of inequality, the widening wealth gap, unemployment, and underemployment, I particularly want to highlight the real threat that we are seeing every day, pushing millions of women into precarious working conditions, and the issue of unpaid care is really critical because it is not financially valued and also it is not recognized. Millions of women in our country, they subsidize the economy to support the development and ensuring that kids go to school, ensuring that the economy is able to survive. There are particular solutions that we have thought about and informed by the partners that we have engaged with in relation to this. And I think the first important one is the conceptual framework of this, which really requires us to recognize that women have multiple roles in this gender responsive climate action and transitions. As leaders, as technical experts, consumers, producers, distributors, and often we refer to them as marginalized and vulnerable, which is true, but we need to be cognizant of these multiple roles and also take into account the intersectional realities such as race, class, geographic location, and physical ability. So when we think about various solutions across negotiated outcomes, mandates, policies, process, and progress, we really need to look at these roles and ensure that we are not putting women in one box. But also, I think one fundamental issue that is really important is to ensure that we work together. There is collaboration, leveraging each other's expertise and synergies to reduce duplication of efforts. I want to highlight a few things for the purpose of this meeting. The issue of leadership, representation, agency, and meaningful engagement of women and youth in all different platforms is critical. I think we talk a lot about nothing about us without us. And I think that principle should really inform what we do next in relation to this conversation. Ensuring that the delegations, the government delegations, they include women and youth, the composition of leadership and technical teams in different ministries and units include women and youth. That's really important. I also want to focus on the issue of the macro and microeconomic interventions, because these transitions, they really provide us with an opportunity to rebuild economic systems and create a pathway for towards gender equality and women empowerment. So we need to really focus on how do we turn the tide against the precarious employment of women and address the issue of the gender wage gap across various sectors. The next thing that I want to highlight is the issue of gender responsive planning. I do have many proposals, but for the purpose of this introduction, I want to mention that the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan must really clearly articulate the gender dimensions and targets for Black women participation across all aspects of the plan and related funding disbursement. We also, the issue of sex disaggregated data by Department of Planning and Monitoring and Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities is also critical to ensure that it informs the strategies, the decisions, the programming, funding and all in that value chain. Another big one, I think the transitions and the climate action provide us with an opportunity of developing green industries. And as we think about this, we really need to look at how do we accelerate socioeconomic growth and transformation and promote women entrepreneurship? How do we build an ecosystem that supports inclusive participation and benefit in the economy? We also need to look at the specifics in relation to that, that really address in a very important way the barriers experienced by women in participating in the economy, the access to affordable and accessible financing, the regulatory frameworks that we need to be looking into. And also, we do have a call to promote 40% of all public procurement linked to the government commitment, as we've heard from the president again on Wednesday. And we need to ensure that across all the new industries and value chains, we really dedicate the amount of time in promoting preferential procurement for women-owned businesses. The last thing that I want to highlight is really the issue of financing. We need to explore innovating financing for gender equality instruments, and look at gender plus facilities or solutions that really enable us to support emerging SMMEs, in particular women-owned SMMEs, to ensure that they can have access to essential services, affordable basic infrastructure, skills and capacity to really build their businesses, and tools that enable them to access those business opportunities. We need to, there are very good examples, and in South Africa, there is one, a gender bond that was developed by Barloworld that has really clear gender indicators supporting women leadership in different sectors, but also supporting preferential procurement for women-owned enterprises. I'm going to end there, and then I will hand over to you, Chair, and wait for additional questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I think you raised such an important point about boxing women into singular categories around where they are vulnerable instead of where the opportunities are. And it's important for us to explore what those opportunities are and go even deeper and ask how we address these strengths in order to empower women to find their feet. The next speaker is Kumi Naidoo. Kumi Naidoo is the founding chair at Africans Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity. Kumi is also a member of the Civil Society Advisory Committee at UN Women. Previously, Kumi was the Secretary General for Amnesty International and was the Executive Director of Greenpeace International. Welcome, Kumi. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mbali, and greetings, everybody. Mbali, I should start by saying that when you did your introductory comments, you said, you know, we've got the, like death and taxes, we got the sort of certainty of climate change. I just want to note that sadly, taxes are not as certain for the rich and powerful as we should know. And that rich and the powerful is usually a handful of very powerful men in our society and in other societies. I thought I would just start by saying that the very term just transition is a term that its evolution did not really factor in gender equity in its thinking when you look at how it evolved in the global north. To a large extent, the idea about just transition when it first emerged was, how do we ensure that workers who work in the fossil fuel industry and other polluting industries, how can we ensure that they are not punished by the need for a transition to a green, clean, renewable energy economy? And when you look at that conversation, it was very much about men, because the people who work in those industries are very much men. So that is one kind of danger that we've been trying to push against over the last sort of decade of this term's emergence. And there's, I would argue, much more work to be done. I should also say that there's also a global north, global south dimension to this. And in the sense that, where will the resources be found for ensuring that workers who are older receive proper pensions and can retire with dignity, younger workers being properly invested in and trained for the new green renewable economy and so on? We can see that rich northern governments in Europe and so on being able to push that and make that happen. And that they will use legislation more powerfully against big companies and so on, right, to make sure that they do that. So I want to say that we will have to be significantly more vigilant in our activism to ensure that in this processes where there are big companies which are multinational and so on in nature, that we don't, generically as a global south suffer as well. But I want to go to my third point, which is to give you a very practical example of how we need to be thinking about ensuring that we are having a gender-centric just transition. So if you think about a mine, right, a coal mine, where we're going to shut that coal mine down because it's killing our children's future, and we need a plan to do that, and so on. So usually the men working in that mine, right, hopefully will be able to ensure they can retire with dignity, but also the younger ones can be trained for new jobs, right? But what happens to all the women who are sitting around those mines and have been providing food, other necessary items, through small informal work and so on? So we need to ensure, one of the things we have to do is to factor into our thinking that the just transition cannot be about just workers in full-time paid employment. It has to be thoroughly thinking about the communities around us. And if we take that approach, then I also think government does not need to wait for big funding to come externally to make the just transition happen. Let me give you a very practical example. One of the ways we could think about just transition that will empower women in the most powerful way, especially in rural areas, is if we, 20 years ago, just said we are going to invest seriously in decentralized micro solar grids for rural areas, right? And we could have done that with limited costs, limited time, and so on. And we could have, and of course, I'm arguing that, yes, we should have done it, but we still can do it, and we can move fast to do those things. Because if you think about just transition, not simply as being in those in employment, but recognize also that in our country that women are doing so much of care work that goes unrecognized, right? Without that care work that is done, everybody in the formal economy who have full-time jobs will collapse. So my argument here is much more for a intersectional way of understanding of those in the formal economy and those in the informal economy must both be taken seriously in all the plannings around the just transition, because we know that who's in the formal economy and who's in the informal economy is heavily gendered. The last point I wanted to make is that we have to be realistic also and in our conversations about where we are. And yeah, I would just conclude by imploring us to remember the words of Albert Einstein when he said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get different results. Trying to do these kinds of big changes in society and then looking at one piece of it, which is how do we make this gender just, right? We have to recognize that as we sit today, there are certain big structural and systemic changes absolutely need to be made for us to be able to make any of what this conversation is about today, right? Now, we might not have the power to change the big things because we need a fundamental change to our economic system, our energy system, our food system, our transport system. And that's clear if we are going to align to actually ensuring that we can address the climate crisis. But I conclude by saying that it does not matter if our actions and our contributions today is not changing the big things immediately, because those things are going to take time. But what we need to do is make sure there's an alignment between what might be seen as incremental tinkering or baby steps in the right direction, be that as it may, if we can make sure that they're aligned to the kinds of fundamental transitions that we need to make to ensure gender justice as well as justice more generally, then I think that can be the way forward. Thank you very much, and I hope I didn't take more than 5 minutes. Thanks.
No, perfect. Thank you so much, Kumi. And I think you make a valuable point about making visible the invisible labor of women, and how investing in women in general, in fact, does the work of an inclusive, just transition. The next speaker is Julia, who is a researcher for climate and inequality at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University. Julia's work focuses on climate justice, the just transition, inequality, and unemployment. Previously, Julia was a researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice and was a program manager at the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. Welcome, Julia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mbali, and thanks for having me today. So I'm going to pick up on some topics that the previous speakers have already mentioned, but I think it's for good reason. So I think there might be some repetition, but sometimes repetition is good. So I guess my first point is that taking a gender approach to just transition requires us to think broadly about the transition, because looking just at formal jobs excludes a significant number of women in the economy. Because women often occupy spaces in the informal sector and in unpaid care work. So this really highlights that in thinking about a transition, we can't just think about the number of formal jobs that are going to be lost or gained, and we have to think, take an expanded view of the economy when we're thinking about how to shift to a more sustainable system. And then I guess my next point is that climate change discourse often kind of either looks at women as victims who are going to be most affected by climate change, which is also often true. Or there's this idea that women are also the saviors and are going to save the environment and, cure all the issues. And that's also not really fair, because again, women are a homogenous group, and we actually have to take an intersectional approach in thinking about these issues, which acknowledges race and other forms of social difference. So that's, another kind of key message, I think, around what a gender just transition could look like. It has to be intersectional. And then what's really important, and has come up in our research on gender and just transition, is that we are currently experiencing a crisis of care. And, if we are expecting to create jobs in new sectors in the transition, which we do need to do, and we're kind of adding on that we want to include a significant amount of women in those jobs, we can't just say, well, make sure that X number of women are trained. We actually need to think about, well, why are women so underrepresented in the energy sector currently? So to date, the coal value chain has extremely low numbers of women in the employed formally, at least around 13%. In the renewable energy sector, it's also very low, around 25 to 30%. So if we want to boost those numbers of women employed, we can't really do that if we don't acknowledge what work women are doing elsewhere that is keeping them very busy and is actually contributing to the economy, but is undervalued and paid or underpaid. And that is because women are often providing childcare, healthcare, food, etc. in the household. And so we have to see the household as a really central part of our economy in order to address or in order to bring about a gender just transition. So if we want to increase the number of women in informal employment, we need to provide affordable childcare. We need to provide affordable and accessible healthcare. Those kinds of services. Currently, the reduced spending on those services is extremely detrimental to all human health in the country, but particularly for the burden of women. And then also access to resources and key services is such an important focus has to be an important focus within the transition. So we can't just talk about shifting to renewable energy. We have to talk about energy poverty, electricity access and affordability. Electricity access increases the efficiency of household chores and reduces the burden of kind of those household maintenance tasks. And so we have to address, again, electricity access and affordability if we want to have a gender just transition. My last point is that we need to reframe what is valued in our economy for a gender just transition. The current system depletes the environment and it depletes human health. And we need an alternative approach that values care for ourselves, for each other, and for the environment. And I guess a key thing that I think is often forgotten is that care jobs are actually low carbon jobs. So we need to be thinking about this care economy as part of the just transition. Thanks, Mbali.
Thanks so much, Julia. You raise an important point, important substantive points, but would like to just respond to, the point around the binary approach we take when dealing with specific groups. Women in particular are either seen as victims or saviors, and perhaps speaks to who is in the room and the representative approach we take when coming up with policies and decision making, and the limitations of representation and the lack of hard work that is needed to for mass consultation, where we engage with the diversity of this group called women, where there are conflicting interests and needs which need to be addressed. Thanks so much, Julia. I'll move on to the next speaker, which is Dora Marema. Dora Marema is the portfolio head for the municipality sustainability portfolio at SALGA. In this role, Dora focuses on climate change, environmental sustainability, green entrepreneurship, gender, and climate justice. Earlier in her career, Dora founded and directed the Green Business College and Gender CC in Southern Africa, focused on women and climate change and climate justice. Welcome, Dora. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you for this opportunity. I think my colleagues who went before me really covered a lot of the issues. I am just going to just reiterate the fact that I think we all agree that the climate change has serious gender effects, that it actually does exacerbate already existing gender inequalities in our country. We know that South Africa is one of the most unequal societies, and I like Kumi's input around the fact that the whole concept of the just transition in itself really has not taken into consideration the role and the contribution of women in its nature. And I think, having said that, it is important that as we embrace this concept within South Africa, that we become really aware that policies like that can have unintended negative gender-based impacts. So as a result, we really need to be vigilant in ensuring that we are advocating strongly in all levels for gender integration or gender mainstreaming within the just transition. We've already also heard that women are very crucial in addressing various socioeconomic issues, including addressing climate change. We know that in a lot of communities, in the local communities, women are really frontline responders when it comes to issues of climate change negative impacts, whether it be floods or droughts or any other things. And I think we also need to understand that women are not waiting for government or agencies to come in and bring solutions. They are already, and they have been for many years, adapting to the negative impacts of climate change. They have been, identifying various innovative ways in which they could be able to exist, whether we label it climate change mitigation or climate change adaptation efforts. That they are, because for them, it is not about designing an intervention or designing a project which has got a beginning and end. It is about their daily lives. It is about their livelihoods, and it is important that as policymakers, as people who have access to various platforms to advocate for the just transition and gender equality, that we really become educated in terms of what are women doing and what are some of the issues that they are really asking for. I think being in local government for me it's really an opportunity for us to make sure that as we conclude the climate change bill, for example, that we are putting together, working with municipalities to put together the climate action plans as required by the bill, which will become an act soon, that we make sure that the climate action interventions and actions are centering women's issues. That I recall on Monday in the session that Ayanda was referring to, one of the things that came out was that if we can be able to make that the just transition to respond to issues of women, then we would have really achieved quite a lot in terms of the justness of the just transition itself, because usually women are out of sight. So they are not in the rooms where these issues are discussed, and we know that out of sight is out of mind, that their issues are not included. And if we can be able to change that and really say, when we are coming up with a policy measure or a policy intervention or any intervention or program, and we say, how will it affect women and how can women be able to contribute to such, then at the end we will emerge or will come out with a policy intervention that would work for all of society. So for me, I think one of the most important things is that we need to make sure that women's full and equitable participation and leadership is there in all the steps of formulating policy, implementing it, monitoring and evaluating the various policies and the various programs. They should be based on sound statistical information. We need to invest in investigating the real impacts of climate change between men and women in communities. A lot of many times we generalize. We try and hop on old statistics that we don't even know who came up with the statistics. And I think it's time that we invest in collecting gender disaggregated data when we compiling risk and vulnerability assessments, when we are compiling the various interventions that are going to respond to those vulnerabilities, so that we really know at the back of our minds who is being affected, who can make a serious contribution. Because just like the inequalities between the North and the South. The same inequalities exist within our own country and within the different provinces and within the different locales within a municipality. And it's important that we need to invest in finding out who are the people who are impacted, who are the people that are going to be affected by the response measures that would come with mitigating, adapting to climate change, and how can they be able to be brought in to play a critical role. I think the one other area that was touched is around the people who lose the jobs and the focus being on the workers themselves. But what about the labor sending provinces, for example, of the Eastern Cape, of Limpopo, into the mining belt, for example, of Mpumalanga? When jobs are lost, what is going to happen to them? And I think the issue around safeguards is really an important one that we need to consider, because it will mean that we are not only just looking at in one dimension in terms of those that are immediately going to be affected, but also those that have built whose livelihoods are dependent on the ones that are going to be directly or primarily impacted. But I think, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I think I'm in agreement with a lot of sentiments that my colleagues has contributed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dora. That was a critical input. The fact that women have been doing the work of adaptation and mitigation is important for us to know. There are lessons there, and of course, anything that has to do with women remains unseen. And it would be important, like you said, to invest and investigate exactly what these adaptation measures are and do that work. Thank you so much. I'll move on to Thandiwe Matthews. Thandiwe Matthews is a program manager for Sub-Saharan Africa at FES. Thandiwe is an admitted attorney of the High Court of South Africa, a lecturer and doctoral researcher with experience in the private and public legal sectors in South Africa. Thandiwe was formerly a senior researcher for civil and political rights at the South African Human Rights Commission, where she was also a senior legal officer monitoring the advancement and protection of human rights. Welcome, Thandiwe, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you for having me. Much of what my remarks wanted to focus on has already been mentioned by our previous colleagues. And I think, as Julia mentioned, repetition is important to demonstrate how important this issue is. So my remarks will focus on the conceptual underpinnings of South Africa's current human rights-based approach to policymaking, which both advance and hinder the achievement of substantive equality in South Africa. The increase in structural inequality in South Africa has occurred despite the establishment of a constitutional democracy founded on the redistributive principles of dignity, equality, and social justice, and the justiciability of constitutionally protected civil, political, and socioeconomic rights afforded to everyone in post-1994 South Africa. My research explores the relationship between constitutionalism, sustainable development, and social policy to advance substantive equality in South Africa, with a particular emphasis on the contestation surrounding social assistance, elites, and intersectional systemic inequalities in the country. In my research, I argue that although the South African Constitution presents a potential framework to confront the country's socioeconomic inequities, the incorporation of human rights language in its development policy frameworks rooted in ethical considerations has reduced South Africa's human rights and development agenda to an apolitical and depersonalized process. Instead, citizenship deliberation and contestation that ought to inform the basis of policymaking has been substituted for processes that are seemingly more expedient and efficient, yet devoid of the Constitution's foundational values. While the Just Transition Framework makes reference to the nuanced manifestations of structural inequality in South Africa and various iterations of justice to advance social justice, it makes no reference to dignity. The distinction is important because dignity ought to inform the conceptual foundation of all development frameworks in order to advance substantive equality in South Africa, defined as the eradication of systemic forms of domination and material disadvantage based on race, gender, class, and other grounds of inequality. It also entails the development of opportunities that allow people to realize their full human potential within positive social relationships. To this end, although the JT framework proposes expanding social protection beyond the delivery of comprehensive social security and basic income support as a key policy area to advance a just transition, caution must also be given to avoid the essentialization of targeted beneficiaries in accordance with dominant stereotypes that currently underpin the social protection system. Such stereotyping can have the implications of being both patronizing and oppressive, notwithstanding the well-intentioned objectives of the laws and policies governing the right to social protection. For example, the country's current approach to social assistance stereotypes Black women as caregivers, while predicating the expansion of the social security system in the African value of Ubuntu to facilitate the transformative potential of the right as one that advances a compassionate society that values reciprocal social relations as the essence of humanness. However, contrary to the philosophical underpinnings of Ubuntu, the individualized nature of the grant system, coupled with the growing exclusion of Black women from accessing the formal economy, has compelled poor households to rely on vulnerable children and the elderly as the only form of social and income support, thereby reinforcing the existing vulnerabilities of targeted grant beneficiaries. So in conclusion, understanding and redressing gender injustice requires an approach of differentiated universalism, centered on the redistribution of the public good that considers how various intersectional inequalities manifest and reinforce each other. And additionally, to create the conditions for parity of participation of all women in South African society, consideration must be given to the conditions that determine who is included and who is excluded from equitably participating in the development and implementation of social policy frameworks that have a direct impact on their well-being. Thank you, Mbali.
Thank you, Thandiwe, for that. I'm always happy when someone brings in the Constitution and its values. And this understanding that equality is complex, equity is complex. And, you know, treating those alike is important, but also treating those who are differently is important too. So thank you so much for those contributions, Thandiwe. I would like to move on to Dr. Rebecca Maserumule. Dr. Rebecca is a Chief Director of for Hydrogen and Energy at the Department of Science and Innovation. Her responsibilities include the implementation of the Natural Energy Science, Technology, and Innovation Plan. Her early working career was spent as a senior researcher at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, focusing on using models to analyze the impact of climate change on water resources. Thank you so much, Dr. Rebecca. Over to you.
No, thank you so much, just for the opportunity to come and be part of the discussion. You know, as a woman in science, this is something very close to my heart, trying to increase the numbers. And, you know, we talk about issues of justice and equality. You know, it's just not just necessarily just women, but it's also issues of people with disability, issues of inclusivity. But I wanted to maybe take the context based on my career, the work I'm doing. So, you know, we work in the science, technology, innovation space. And one of the key things that we worry about is the pipeline of talent. And really the reason why the pipeline of talent is so important, that is diverse, is because, you know, innovation is actually, you know, hindered by a lack of diversity. So if you have teams which are homogeneous, you're not bringing in different views and points of view. So to have the most competitive South Africa, we actually need a very diverse pipeline and a diverse team. And one of the natural challenges we have in science, technology, innovation is the actually share of women who are actually in that pipeline. So a couple of years ago, I would say the Academy of Sciences, they actually did a study on understanding the number of women in engineering. This is like energy engineering, electrical, mechanical, mining, and so forth. And they found that I think they were below 20, the numbers were sitting at around 20%. And then actually in some sectors or engineering sectors, they hadn't had a woman actually even participating in the, even enrolling in courses in those sectors. So I think mining engineering was one of the sectors where you didn't find In some universities, not even one woman in the, taking a degree. So I think in terms of the solutions or what we need to do, the first thing is to understand your baseline. So I've heard some of the other speakers talk to the issues of studies and so forth. Those studies may seem very wishy-washy, but they're very important because when you understand your baseline, then you can start the second step, which is setting targets. Like I said, the number of women in engineering or engineering relevant to the energy sector sitting around 20%. And I know at the DSI, we have a target of trying to go for, I think most cases, no less than 30, hopefully moving towards 50% because we're 50% of the population. So an experience that I have with the program that we manage is the Hydrogen South Africa program, where we have, we've over the last 15 years have funded close to 192 masters and PhDs, been funded in South Africa and have graduated. And I think around 30 to 35% are actually women. So we're really proud of that target because it's above the 20%, which is the number for overarching, but we're hoping to move that number up. And I think we've done that well by ensuring that women in leadership positions in our implementing agencies actually have been having very good mentoring and coaching programs and creating pathways for women. And then after you understand your baseline by doing studies, setting targets, then you need to create and outline what the opportunities are. And I think this is what, for me, is really exciting is that, like I said, we mentioned that, as I mentioned, we've been funding masters and PhDs for the last 15 years, but just about 3 years ago, we said, look, we need to actually find opportunities in this green energy space for masters and PhDs, but also for what we call blue collar workers. So we started working with TVET colleges as well as University of Technology to actually start reskilling unemployed youth. So we started this in 2020 at the height of COVID. And we found that you probably get a better share of women in the TVETs. So, we did some training of unemployed TVET graduates, and I think close to 60% of them were women. It was a 6-week reskilling program, and about 70% of those students actually received jobs after the reskilling program. So again, by increasing the number of opportunities, not just in high tech, but also along the whole value chain, that actually helped us to actually bring in more women. And then also in terms of the transparency around the opportunity, we worked with database systems which were managed by the Energy Water CETA to ensure that the opportunities were given to not just a handful of people who knew, but to the large majority of people could be aware. So this is the work of government to put in place these databases and working with existing programs. So, Energy Water CETA had database systems, and there's other programs like Harambe Initiative, which supports youth. So we can not necessarily create our own new systems, but actually work with existing people, like existing initiatives that actually helps to create more opportunities and make sure everyone knows the information. And then last but not least, I think once you put them in so we're talking about the pipeline. So you create the pipeline, you create targets, you create, ensure everyone knows the opportunities, but then we need to make sure that our ecosystems around this pipeline are very supportive. So for me, that goes towards ensuring that you have consistent funding. So just not funding for 1 or 2 years, you need to have consistent funding, probably 10, 15 years minimum, so that they know that the pipeline can be supported no matter who comes in. But then also mentoring is a really important aspect of it. So what I've found is that, mentoring, again, this new age of post-COVID, online mentoring systems are very important for success. So we're finding that, a lot of even successful organizations are using online mentoring. And then if we can find initiatives like that in South Africa, where we can create access for those who are in other provinces where you don't have as much economic activity, maybe doing online mentoring with, with mentors in provinces where you have more academic activity, maybe you will actually have more environmental justice going on. So I think just in summary, so first of all, understanding your baseline, setting those targets, and being really bold around setting those targets. Third, making sure that the opportunities are known by everyone by using existing networks, systems, especially those networks which are specifically for those who are disadvantaged. And then last but not least, creating supportive ecosystems and using the technology at hand, maybe for online mentoring, as well as ensuring information is available. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rebecca. You exemplify, what diversity and inclusion can do. Thank you so much for that contribution and setting out what needs to be done so clearly. I've got it written down. Thanks for that, Doctor. The next speaker is Matthews Hlabane. Matthews Hlabane is the coordinator of the South African Green Revolutionary Council in Emahlaleni. He worked for Makua and is the national organizer of the Right to Say No and Cry of the Excluded. He focuses on environmental justice struggles, which he led to establish links with a range of communities affected by mining. Welcome, Matthews. Over to you.
Good morning and thanks Mbali for the opportunity. I think my colleagues have said a mouthful. Just need to add a few important points. The first one that I want to indicate is that there is an importance in terms of moving the discussions and the programs about just transition to the communities themselves. In most cases, it happens that this discussion is confined to government officials, to academics, to NGO specialists, and all of that. It does not filter people on the ground, working class communities in the rural areas are not discussing anything about just transition, nor do they understand what this just transition is all about. So it's only us who have that understanding. It is therefore important for us to simplify and make sure that it reaches out, especially when it comes to the implementation part, so that it is not only confined to, it does not become an academic, discussion. It is not also confined to technologies, because when we're talking about just transition, in order for us to be just, it is not only about transitioning from the one form of energy to another. It involves the entire societal transitioning, which also includes getting rid of our certain ways in which we are so wasteful. How do we manage our energy resources? Is where we need to invest resources in terms of our education system. But at the same time, we need to take into consideration that just transition must have more to do with transforming the power relations. When I refer to power relations, earlier on, my colleague Kumi and I think it was Dora, and they touched on the whole aspect of unpaid labor, the role that our women are playing, our sisters, mothers are playing, and which the capitalist system is actually benefiting through that unpaid labor. So we need to take steps to actually get rid of unpaid labor. We need to take steps to address the power relations, which will also include patriarchy, especially in South Africa and Southern Africa as a whole. And we need to recognize the alternatives that people, especially women from below, are coming up with. And one colleague has said, I think it was Dora who said, women have already long time ago started coming up with initiatives. So we need to recognize that and actually support, provide the resources instead of I've seen a trend in South Africa where people from office, people that are that is from above, dictating. They come to rural women and dictate on how women should actually conduct themselves. So I think that's what we need to address, to say these alternatives need to be supported, and we need to make sure that just transition is not dependent on foreign funding or other loans, because that's exactly what we need to transition from. If we are dependent on loans, that means we are forever going to be indebted. And therefore, the country will not be able to provide basic services. And there's going to be continuous suffering, especially where we see our own mothers and sisters carrying the burden of collecting wood simply because they are trying to address energy poverty. So these are some of the things that we need to address, to say we need to start talking about just transition from below, where our people are located. And we need to come up with ways in which we roll back the programs that seek to uproot our communities. We see the expansion of certain programs and projects contributing to the uprooting of communities and the creation of dependency. Who is getting uprooted in South Africa when especially, the so-called rare minerals which are required for renewable energy are going to be mined? If it is rare minerals, it is clear that women are going to be victims of being uprooted, of being expelled from the land. So these are some of the things that we need to begin to address. And when you take away rural women from the land, we have destroyed everything. We have destroyed the livelihoods. We have destroyed even the culture of working collectively. So we don't want to see that continuous. I think the plans and the programs of implementation must hit direct there. How do we ensure that we protect our water sources? When we protect our water sources, we refer here to our water tables, we refer here to our rivers, our wetlands. And who is using the rivers, the wetlands most of the time? It is our women, it is our mothers, our fathers, in the rural areas, our sisters. It is them that when the river is contaminated, because of the societal arrangement, who must go and fetch water from far. So these are points that I want to bring to the table to say, in order for this just transition to be just, there should be no exclusion, especially of women. Women must play a pivotal role in terms of shaping their future, but it is not only our sisters and mothers who are academics, who are involved in the technological world, that must determine that future. It is the ordinary women on the ground. I must also bring in another aspect, that we also need to make sure that just transition addresses the commodification of basic services. Because when these services are commodified, who gets to suffer more? So I just want to end there and submarine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthews. Another important input. You're absolutely correct. We have the ability to contribute to the just transition ourselves. There's no need for us to outsource every aspect of this just transition. And another important point you made was about simplifying the message and information. I used to have a professor who would say, if you can't speak to an issue simply, then perhaps you don't understand it yourself. And hopefully we can do the work of simplifying the message and information so that the everyday person can understand and engage with it. And in many ways, people in our communities are having these conversations, but not couched in the language of just transitions and climate change. Thank you again, Matthews, for that. Last but not least, we have Rabelani. Chika Lanke, and he is the director of green economy programs and projects within the energy team at the Department of Infrastructure in the Western Cape government. Rabelani has worked in the field of climate and energy for 2 decades, holding posts with the Department of Minerals and Energy, City of Joburg, and the Department of Environmental Affairs. Over to you, Rabelani.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bali, for this opportunity. And it's really a pleasure and honor to participate in this dialogue, more especially in the very pertinent topic of how best we can be able to support and empower women while we really are growing our economies and growing the economies in the sustainable, resilient, and inclusive manner. And that's exactly what we are doing. Is the Western Cape, we do have a growth for jobs strategy, which emphasizes whole of Western Cape government approach. And with that particular strategy, we're saying, how do we ensure that as we grow the economy, women's challenges are addressed and we're able to empower them as we do that. And with that particular ambitious strategy where we want to grow the economy, have a 1 trillion economy by 2035. And how do we ensure that as we do that, we then are supporting women? And as previous speakers have already said, nothing about us without us. It's what has to be looked at to ensure that whatever implementation plans, engagements, and deliberations, women are also at the forefront of that, so that they can be able to shape and craft their strategies and implementation plans. And from ourselves as government, I think it's important that as we deliver our services to the people, be it delivering water, delivering sanitation, education, housing, women are at the center of that, because as we know that they have been marginalized for a very long time. They are not really, most of them in the, they are in the periphery of the economy. How do we bring them back and ensuring that they are able to, enjoy the opportunities that are available at the moment as we are transitioning towards, a low carbon economy. So there are some considerations that I would like to talk about. And obviously some of them are, centered around ensuring that we respond impactfully to the opportunities that are available. And we are able to respond in a sustainable manner to ensure that not only does the generation that is current enjoy what needs to be available, but also the future generation are able to be catered for in the growth we're seeking, ensuring that there is innovation. We try to look at things differently, ensuring that there are partnerships and cooperation that we forge as we address women empowerment issues, redress through economic participation, and ensuring equal opportunities. So I will look at some of the 7 priority focus areas, and in those priority focus areas, I'll focus a bit more on the energy space because this is the space that I've been working on for quite some time. And some of these areas is on the, how do we drive growth opportunities through investment, radically increasing supply of affordable housing, which is quite critical. And as you would know that if you do not have housing, more especially women who are caregivers, it becomes a bit of a challenge for them to, enter into, the economy competitively. We need to ensure that we strengthen and the collaboration and partnerships We need to also look at the role of women in stimulating market growth through export and domestic markets. How do they, enter into the export markets? How do we strengthen and diversify the export base and strengthening export capabilities? Also ensuring that women are able to play a big role, not only in the country, but in Africa and also internationally. In terms of gaining access to markets. The third item is in terms of ensuring that we are empowering women in the energy space, as I've already alluded to this as quite critical space, while ensuring that we are resilient and we are transitioning to net zero, carbon going forward, because as you may be knowing, climate change is now has reached a critical, limit. There are deliberations happening internationally through, COPs, through the IPCC, which is on science and et cetera, et cetera. How do we ensure that, women are empowered to enter into the, energy resilience space? So there are opportunities in the alternative energy sector where we would need a bit of, skilling and upskilling in some instances, training in the green economy value chain. There are opportunities now in the solar panels, value chain, where women can be able to be involved in maintaining this, installing these, et cetera, and also looking at other opportunities, for example, in the solar water, these are kind of spaces where there is plumbing, opportunities that are available. So there are various opportunities that we could be able to leverage on in the energy space, and ensuring that women are able to, have SMMEs, be involved in the SMMEs, and have their own businesses, and be able to, own, some of the microgrids that could be created, and can themselves also be able to create jobs. And there are also funding opportunities that are available. Some of the climate funds that are available internationally to South Africa, and also, other opportunities in that space, to ensuring that as they have got projects that they are working on, these projects are bankable. How do we ensure that as governments, we are able to support them? And also not only government, but the private sector, be able to support them to ensure that these projects that they have are bankable. While we're encouraging local production of key renewable energy components, as I've already talked about the PV, solar PV space, small and medium enterprises in the renewable energy space, and this space of especially for women, and development of key skills in that, as I've already mentioned. And also creating green energy hubs and manufacturing zones. Some of the examples with the Atlantic Special Economic Zone here in Western Cape, where women are being supported, youth and the vulnerable populations, in terms of benefiting from these green energy hubs, creating income generation opportunities, promoting skills in this particular sector, and ensuring that there is partnerships with these international agencies for skilling and reskilling in this sector. So also, as I've already mentioned, addressing challenges related to small-scale grid-tight solutions, ensuring that we create economics of scales, and ensuring ownerships models are looked at. Also, there is an issue of water. The previous speaker spoke about the water security and resilience. Mostly, how do we ensure that as a water scarce country, we're able to save water, but ensuring that the opportunities that are available there in the either rainwater harvesting tanks. We know that women are much more, involved in the water area as the caregivers. How do we ensure that we empower them in terms of other technologies that would ensure that they become, water developers, take advantage of the decentralized technologies in the water space, and so on and so forth in terms of, efficiency in the area. Also, the issue of technology and innovation, which is quite critical. We need to strengthen ease of doing business. Women want to open businesses, but it's not so easy in most cases for them to be able to do that. How can we, stimulate economy regarding funding and venture capital accessibility for women? Ensuring that we promote an ecosystem of technology and innovation, taking advantage of the digital, revolution that is available. How do the women open, for example, businesses that are internet-based, and focusing also on innovation and creativity, which have been barriers, more especially barriers that have been due to education that is not really empowering them, and in some instances, some of the women are not really at the stage where they are skilled either to enter into the formal or informal business sector. So that is another area to look at. Infrastructure and connected economy, the issue of mobility or transport systems is quite critical. I mean, we've been seeing how transport plays a critical role, more especially for women, because at the moment, most of the vulnerable people are staying, far away from economic opportunities in cities and so on and so forth. But how do you ensure that you create an infrastructure that would be able to target women, sometimes targeting them by creating vibrant economies where they are, ensuring that they get, housing, ensuring that there is digital infrastructure. Some women who are, for example, in the periphery in rural areas, they are not even able to apply for jobs, mainly because there is no, internet where they would be. How do we ensure that we, galvanize opportunities to ensure this digital revolution is enhanced? Improving access to economic opportunities and employability is quite critical as well. As we are, ensuring that there is jobs where people are, because at the moment people are living far away from jobs, more especially women, the entrepreneurship opportunities where we could be able to scale those, not only skilling women on entrepreneurship, but also skilling them also on some of the soft skills that they would need to be able to know that that particular business is able to be viable and successful. Utilizing, the EPWP space, and how do we support township economics and also women in that space, ensuring that they are safe in all respects, and there are opportunities that are available there. So I think that is for me what I wanted to say. There is a lot of opportunities in the green economy space. It's a new space, but there are opportunities that could be, harnessed, particularly, for women to be able to thrive in their businesses and be able to, create these opportunities and employ even other people around. They become, owners and be able to succeed. Thank you so much, Chairperson. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Rabelani. It's so exciting to hear all these opportunities and the intention to address these challenges, as well as, how government is committed to do that. So thank you to all of our panelists for those remarks. And the next section is us entering into a discussion. I would also like to say to our guests, please do feel free to send questions in the chat, and we'll open up the floor shortly. So to the panelists, I'm just going to put up a question out here and have you respond. In many ways, we've spoken about some actions that we need to take. But what specific actions should be included in an implementation plan that promotes gender equality? And in thinking about that answer, who are the implementers of such specific actions, or who should be the implementers of such specific actions? Please raise your hand if you would like to answer the question. Ayanda, and then Tandiwe.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for that question. So I just want to quickly say that there are things that you can start doing by tomorrow. The representative, like they have been listed, those are easy. What I was thinking about is really a game changer, like something that is really going to transform women's lives in this sector. And so in thinking about this game changer in the context of high unemployment and underemployment, as we have talked about in this in this conversation, something that is going to ensure that women participate and have ownership and benefit in this transition to green economy. And I really liked the idea that Kumi put forward of decentralizing the solar generation. And because that will ensure that we have a number of women, a lot of women who are really, especially in poor communities and in rural areas or in township, who really have ownership and stake in the process of transition. And for us to be able to achieve that, we obviously need to look at the issue of land ownership and security of tenure, working with the Department of Agriculture. We need to be looking at financing solutions, investment that will contribute to skills and upskilling. I think Dr. Rebecca talked a lot about the work that they do in relation to that. But we need more investment that will ensure that we have trade-ready people who are able to run enterprises that will help and contribute to the overall value chain in the economy. And I think, lastly, what is really important is to get development partners, the private sector, the women associations and women entrepreneurs and youth themselves to really conceptualize. And I think my colleague Dora mentioned that there is a lot of these initiatives. And I think the big thing is, how do we ensure that women owning up to 40% of, or 50% for that matter, of energy transition in the green in the transition in the green economy. So yeah, that's what I would want to put forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayanda. Tandiwe, Kumi, then Julia, and then Dora.
Thank you. One of the points I wanted to make was that, given that we're going through a transition, it also gives us an opportunity for reconceptualization. And often in the South African context, we are told South Africa has great policies, the problem is its implementation. But what we are seeing is that our policies have not necessarily been conceptualized in a manner that advances social justice and substantive equality. And consequently, the implementation of those policies are going to be flawed and give room to ineffective or maladministration within the public sector. We often focus a lot on combating corruption in order to ensure that there is effective policy implementation, but we don't really problematize how we view the role of policy in the society that we want to advance. So with social protection, for example, we have one of the most expansive social protection systems on the continent. We've incrementally expanded quite phenomenally over the last 30 years, access to social protection for marginalized groups. We are internationally recognized for our social protection system, and yet it has not been able to address systemic inequalities in our society. And that's largely because our approach to human rights has been through the lens of poverty alleviation. It's been through the lens of ensuring that people don't die. It hasn't been through the lens of ensuring that people live a life with dignity. So I do think this is an opportunity for all of us, those who occupy various spaces of decision-making power, to reconceptualize how we define the role of rights-based approaches in our society, whose lives we actually value, and how we conceptualize value in our society. So I think these debates just need to be ongoing, and rather than being kind of rushed in order to have some form of output, that if we continue to have evolving conversations of the role of rights-based approaches in our society, we will see the evolution of advancing substantive equality. Thank you.
Thank you, Thandiwe. Kumi?
Thank you, Mbali. I know you're looking for practical sort of recommendations in this section. So I'm going to go the route of trying to be ultra practical, okay, and present an idea, because I think the big challenge that we face right now, given the state of corruption in the country, the inefficiency of governments, and the decay of our society, there is pessimism, and we need to be able to say to ourselves that pessimism is a luxury we simply cannot afford at this moment of history. One. Two, we have to say that the pessimism of our analysis must be overcome by the creativity of our thought, our action, and our effort. And I want to suggest something very practical, because listening to what other panelists have said, which has been really helpful and inspiring for me. So I would say we need to come out of discussions like this, right, with something practical. So let me offer a practical suggestion. One is, how would it be if UN Women, right, Gift of the Givers, and National Business Initiative, and Business Unity South Africa, and whichever other business bodies they are, right, come together in a coalition, right, and say to government that we want to partner with government to start delivering, not 5 years from now, not 1 year from now, within 3 months from now, we want to start rolling out micro solar grids in rural communities so as to lift people out of energy poverty. And we know when we say people in this context, the majority are women. And even if you take an issue like the indignity of people having to walk so far for water, right? We can, and I've been part of initiatives, for example, at Russell's Valley in the border with the Lesotho, where you can actually have solar powered water pumps that can bring water closer to people so they don't have to spend so much of time going to fetch it and so on. So, so I would say that given the immobility we see within government, right, we should not expect leadership from government on this. But what we need from government is whatever resources that have not been looted already that is available, that they should be made available for initiative like this that can be matched. I would say if civil society goes to government and say, with the business, and say, we call on government to match every cent raised by civil society and business rand by rand, and that's government's role, and government can do the framework and so on. But if you're gonna address climate change, we have to activate this as everybody's responsibility. Government, even if we didn't have the corruption, even if we didn't have the inefficiencies and so on, government will not be able to deliver. The scale of the problem is too big. And unless we mobilize everybody to participate, and if I'll just conclude with a practical suggestion as well. In India, there is a college known as Barefoot College in Rajasthan. They have been training women who are not literate, right, in a 6-month program to be producers of solar panels and to be maintainers of solar panels, right? They might not be able to read and write, but they have a program that can do that. So there are resources like that I think we need to start to be pulling on so that we start doing things and that we don't get immobilized by talking about really good ideas, which we seemingly really struggle to implement. And if the implementation energy is not coming from government for all sorts of reasons, then let's start looking at what business together with civil society can do. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you for that very practical action. Thanks, Kumi. Julia?
Thanks, Mbali. So on the practical side, something that is a tool which we can use to assess the kind of gender impacts of transition are time use surveys. So time use surveys are run by, the last one was in 2010 in South Africa, and it actually asks people what they do with their time every day. And it's one of the best kind of measures of unpaid care work, informal work, these things that aren't often captured in formal employment surveys, for example. So I would say something we can do tomorrow, and that Stats SA can carry out if they have funding, is a time use survey, and is the updated time use survey. It should have been done in 2020, but has been delayed. And just kind of understanding where we're at with time use will then help us to understand how much women and other, anyone is spending on the kind of additional burden of fetching wood or, adapting to climate change, growing food, these kinds of things that are going to be more and more important in a transition. And then I guess it's so hard to, say a practical thing, because I was going to say a universal basic income grant. We can also do that. We've got the SRD, it's worked, it's a model. But I also want to say, actually, we need universal basic services. So actually, if we, provided an income grant that would support the unpaid care work that is already happening, but actually, if we had healthcare, childcare, education services that worked for everyone, that were accessible and affordable, that would be truly transformative. So if we can just figure that out. Thanks, Mbali.
Thanks so much, Julia. Dora?
Thank you so much, Mbali, for this opportunity. I think just to add on to what my colleagues have said, I think one other thing, one thing that is going to contain and assist with driving all of these is for us to take a step back and have the commission, together with the sector department that is responsible for the climate change response in the just transition, that is guiding, I think it's DFFE and the other sector departments. We need an all of society campaign. Firstly, that educates all of society about the just transition and why we need to transition, almost like about climate change, and then the need for us to transition. And then we need partnerships between these institutions and the community-based organizations. I think Matthew's indicated that. In every corner, municipalities where there will be discussions around the transitions that lie ahead in each of all those areas, including the creation of the new economic clusters, and engage with the communities. And again, largely those many of those communities will have a lot of women, and then take that opportunity to incorporate their inputs into the various programs, or as part of the Just Transition Framework Implementation Plan. Because I just feel like we could just be thinking, okay, let's just go and ensure that there is gender justice or around the just transition. But I feel like there's still a step where many of our people are really not clear about what this transition is all about and why do we even need it. So we need a massive multi-stakeholder campaign that is going to communicate this issue that we are facing, that is going to link the disasters that we are facing with the reason why we have to transition, because I feel like also the media needs to be taken into consideration. It must be funded by various stakeholders, because government alone is not going to be able to fund this. We need to see this on billboards. We need to see this on TV. We need to hear about it in radio, on radio stations, or in all languages, so that we can be able to ensure that when we are engaging, when we are requesting for inputs, that people are coming from an informed place and are able to participate. So for me, that will be one of the critical things, is that we need an education or awareness campaign, probably the likes of what we had when we had HIV and AIDS kind of thing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dora. I was thinking the exact same thing when you said we need a thorough campaign, and we have experience in doing that during the HIV and AIDS epidemic. Thanks for that. Rabelani?
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the opportunity again. I wanted to just re-emphasize the point that I've just mentioned in my intervention, more especially, taking advantage of the opportunities that are available in the renewable energy space. And there is a saying by some, that never waste a crisis. So developed countries who were involved in the same crisis that we are in terms of energy, have used that to really leapfrog themselves and move faster to develop themselves and their communities. So we need a clear action plan in this renewable energy space, because this is a fast-growing green economic sector, and there is always a lack of skill sets in the area, which is quite critical at the moment. So we need to develop these skill sets. We need to be sure that we are able to get required skills, so that women in particular are able to own and run micro solar grids, to be able to have solid partnerships where women have got shareholdings in the solar space. In some developed countries, you've got women, when you've got, for example, a wind farm around the community, you have women directly having shareholding ownership from that particular wind farm. So for us, it can be wind, it can be solar. We need to ensure that we are deliberate in making sure that women are able to start businesses and have shareholding and be able to benefit from the crisis that is with us at the moment.
Yeah.
So there are opportunities, as I said, in the PV, solar water geysers, in the spaces where they can be able to develop these particular businesses. It also starts from schools. We need to have a curriculum that is targeted to ensuring that our people are artisans. They're able to create businesses, not only relying on being employed, but they can employ themselves as they go up, they grow up from early childhood or all the way. And for us to do that, we can't, of course, do this alone as government. We need to partner, to have strong partnerships. Within government, you need to have that partnership with municipalities, provincial government, and national government. But in addition to that, you need partnership with academia, more especially if you're talking about skills, reskilling issues. So you need partnership with universities, colleges, and all others. You also need partnerships with the private sector and also the non-governmental organizations in the space. Then you will be able to move and take advantage of the crisis. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rabelani. In fact, someone in the comment section, Bantwini Matika, said, we would like to use our platform for debates and engagements to be taken down to the future leaders at schools. Matthews.
Thanks so much. I sometimes say to people, just transition is not gonna happen if it does not incorporate food sovereignty. Just transition in South Africa is not going to happen if it does not address the current challenges that we have. So the starting point is to tap into the resources that are there, the rehabilitation bonds. Our government is sitting with billions of rands. We need those resources to be rolled out, not for any other thing, but for training, for supporting, food sovereignty, for supporting rehabilitation of the current abandoned and sterilized lands because of the mining industry. Just transition is not going to happen if those that have caused the destruction are not held liable or responsible to cover for some of the cost. And it's not going to happen when our communities are not actively participating in the economy. So this then comes to address the whole issue of renewable energy. When we roll out solar panels and wind turbines, where are we going to source these solar panels? Are we going to produce these solar panels at local level, the wind turbines at local level? Have we done our proper studies in terms of what impact are these solar panels and solar batteries, all of them, going to have to the environment? The rare minerals that are required for the production of the solar panels, the lithium batteries, the wind turbines, where are they going to be mined? Are communities not going to be expelled from that land? Is there not going to be a destruction of the environment? So when I say it is not confined to technologies, I simply say we cannot get rid of one problem to replace it with another big problem. So what we need to look at is to focus on societal change. There's the whole issue of certain trade agreements that needs to be done away, especially the intellectual property rights, which limits us from producing certain things as a country. When you start rolling out solar panels, you are going to roll out solar panels that you have imported from China or from Italy. So people have those rights, and we must buy the license from them. How do we break away from that as a country? I think the planning and the action must address that. When I said we don't need foreign to get ourselves into debts, I simply said the billions that are sitting there as rehabilitation bonds. As last time I checked, there was about 17 billion from Mpumalanga, and another, I think 20 or something billions for Gauteng. Why don't we attack those resources and make better use of those resources to retrain our people, roll out land, rehabilitate the land so that people can start producing from the land? How are we going to support alternatives? You see, sometimes we talk about just transition as if it is there. We ourselves must transition.
Thank you so much.
We ourselves are the first one to transition. And I'm telling you, it is us that are going to resist the transition. It is us that are going to resist the transition because the ordinary people in the rural areas are not as destructive as we are. We are carrying so many gadgets, so many cars, enjoying the luxuries of our destruction. So we need to transition ourselves.
Thank you for
as long as we convene meetings as government and we eat food that we don't know where it comes from, as long as people are consuming food that is not, produced in environmental or ecologically sound practices, then we are not transitioning. We are simply saying the status quo must remain. We don't want to say the past has been so destructive because the people were excluded in the economy, and therefore the future is not going to be destructive and the people are still going to be excluded in the economy. The reality is that as long as everything that we do is driven by profits, we are at danger. Climate change is going to stay with us. So that is the point that I'm trying to say, that let us shift and focus on how do we get our people to be included, to play a meaningful role in shaping their future. How do we support the initiatives that are coming from below instead of wanting to determine things from above?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthews. You made that point very well and very clear. I want to open up the floor to our guests, and there are two people who would like to speak online. May I get Lillian to ask her question, please? Ask their question.
Thank you, Mbali. I'm Lillian Kwambuka, and I work with the International Institute for Environment and Development as a researcher on climate change. And thank you so much for inviting me for this, for allowing me to participate in this conversation. And I really liked the point made by the last person on food sovereignty and the role that it plays towards a just transition. But I want to take the conversation towards a different direction, and it's not really a question, but it's more of a comment, and talk about the issue of unpaid care work, which I'm particularly concerned because it's not getting the weight or the attention that it deserves, and the role that it plays in this whole just transition conversation. And I'm a bit worried that if it's overlooked, then it's like we are likely to get to a point where we have a green economy that misses the gender just element of it. And I wanted to talk specifically about the importance of the unpaid care work plays in any economy, and yet it's not, given as much attention as other issues. And we all know that as much as we are trying to move towards a green economy for our nations, and there are so many opportunities that have been mentioned by previous speakers that may arise for women in this green economy. And this is likely to, of course, contribute to economic growth, to improve livelihoods, and to make women more active contributors to the economies. But if we don't address the issue of unpaid care work, then we are also going to compromise women's well-being and social prosperity at the end, which I think might create further inequalities, even in a green economy. So thinking about some of the practical ways that we could make sure that this is part of the conversation and the actions towards a green economy, I was thinking about, for example, efforts to promote shared responsibility between men and women as we work towards green economies. And this could be, for example, through public awareness campaigns, where we also have an opportunity to engage men as allies, not as enemies, so that we all work together to ensure that there is a shared responsibility for caregiving in the new or in the green economy. And then having workshops and educational programs, making efforts to institutionalize issues that deal with unpaid care work, so that, our kids from a younger age are educated on the need to promote a shared responsibility. And someone was talking earlier about the role of a digital economy in the green economy world. And I think this could be one way that we could, leverage to promote flexible work arrangements where, women or men are not required to be in offices on a daily basis, which allows them time to share, caregiving responsibilities. And all this will be an opportunity, you know, to challenge traditional gender roles and enable all social groups to embrace caregiving as a shared responsibility in a green economy.
Absolutely.
Because I think it's otherwise we risk having a green economy where inequalities are an everyday reality, and we will definitely get to a green economy if we work towards it, but without the justice element of it in terms of a gender transition.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that contribution. The last hand we have is Mazarette. Mazarette, are you with us? You still on mute? Okay, it seems like we're having a bit of an issue there. There are some questions.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, not clearly though, Mazarette.
Can you hear me clearly now?
Yes, go for it.
Hello,
Hi.
can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, but there seems to be a noise in the background.
What about now, ma'am?
Yes, let's go for it.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Mesret Taklamariam Zametkun. I'm from the United Nations Environment Program here in Pretoria office. And we are very much grateful for being invited to this event, which is very important, and which we also held actually a similar event recently with the UN Women. And having this discussion, basically, you know, given that now we have under this climate crisis, and also actually the IPCC or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is warning us actually to transition. Basically, it is not only, you know, that we are talking about the green economy transition, the transition of blue economy, the transition of circular economy. We have to go to net zero economy. However, this is not, now we are talking about transition. However, when we talk about the traditional economy where we are today, does not take into consideration the representation. The traditional economy always underrepresent women. If we really see, our women are overrepresented in unpaid care work. They are, you know, if you just see it globally, more than 600 million people in the world are within unpaid care work compared to the women, the men 48% of them. So basically, they are more of underrepresented, like the green industries, like the, you know, the renewables. Only 32% of them are only represented in the green industry or the renewable energy compared to the 68% of men. So what do we do about this? So basically, the transition, what we are leading, should really give a paradigm shift of bringing the, you know, the underrepresented of women to a level where they are to be, you know, just represented in equitable manner with men, where we have particularly in the science technology aspects, in the leadership role, and particularly those women who are in the unpaid care work. So during this transition, when we go talk about just transition, it should be gender just transition. It is not only talking or focusing about, it's not the Mpumalanga, all the where those are employed going to the unemployment. The issue is now, how do we involve the unpaid care work to this just transition and involve them? How do we bring our young people to the level where we have the science, technology, engineering, mathematics education, and bring them to that level? So for this, one of the things I heard from the panelists also, we should really see the education, digitalization, and also I think bringing all women together on the same level, like men, from school level, from community level, and others. So for us, I think as UNEP, will be very much happy to work with PCC and others in really involving women as primary managers of actually in putting the transformative power for clean energy lighting, for cooking. Cooking is always we forget. That is the clean cooking aspect. And also for productive uses for food and others. So we are very much happy to work with and really join our forces to ensure the representation of women in just transition to make gender just transition. Thank you very much, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mazarette. I'm going to ask for one more hand, Gugulethu, please do keep it short so that we can get one more round of input from our panelists. Gugulethu, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mbali. I will try to keep it very short. But basically, I just wanted to speak more on the impact of Mpumalanga because I am a product of Witbank. I was born and bred in Witbank, eMalahleni in Mpumalanga. And my dad worked in the mines. So I am familiar with the current, injustice that is taking place and people's, and my community's fear of job losses and the women, also stepping up in terms of the roles that they are now finding themselves in because the breadwinners being the miners in Komati that's just been decommissioned are no longer working. Everybody is panicking. So the women are now looking at ways of kind of rising up to ensure that their households are fed, to ensure that, the mentality of mines being the focal point for their kids kind of also gets changed. We are all currently undergoing a mind shift change in terms of what is going to sustain our communities. The mines are going to go, we're going to become a ghost town and we're comparing each other's smaller towns around us like Hendrina, like Standerton, all of those that were once thriving that are now currently ghost towns. And I'm seeing that women are prioritizing agriculture. Myself, I am an aquaponics farmer, and I've always advocated for women to look at climate smart solutions because technically that's where the world is going and everybody wants to get involved. But as to how we can support each other, for me, is a conversation that I think really needs to start taking precedence because I mentioned in the chats that we can speak about these discussions forever, but what are the solutions? What can we do in these communities? Because another thing that's currently happening is the whole greenwashing that corporates are now trying to do, in terms of the climate change. I mean, I'm trying to acquire funding for aquaponics, and I'm always tasked with measuring my climate impact. How much am I actually saving? When I'm talking about climate change, what do climate impact and climate change, what does my company do differently? So I'm learning that, and I'm trying to also allow women to go back to agriculture, go back to our indigenous practices, regenerative agriculture, because the soil is alive and the soil is the biggest natural carbon sink. So we are trying as a community, but how are we going to be assisted? Who are we going to inquire to and from? What are the opportunities for us to really step up? Where's the implementation? I think it's Dr. Sorry, I forgot, but she mentioned about social justice, which I think was the head on the nail, or the nail on the head, when she mentioned implementation. We are so good at policies, but implementing these policies for women is not something I'm seeing in my community, particularly, which is very ironic because this is the pilot of the Just Transition. So yeah, Mbali, that's actually where I'm at. And I really hope that we can have more of these discussions focusing on implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gugu. Indeed, we will Google it. So we only have 7 minutes left. And as a way to round off, I'm going to ask each panelist in one sentence, 30 seconds, if possible, to answer this question in closing. And I'll start with Ayanda. How do we alleviate and empower women as climate leaders?
I think the most important thing is to ensure that we are engaging meaningfully with women, as we have heard from this conversation, from various communities at different levels, and recognizing their multiple roles in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Ayanda. Kumi. Hi, Kumi, are you there? We'll come back to Kumi. Julia.
Thanks, Mbali. So this has been such an interesting discussion, and I have so many things in my head, but I'm trying to, be concise. I think I wanted to just address the question about trans women. And I think we have to include trans women in this process. And I feel uncomfortable when we just talk about women, because care work in South Africa is done by often majority women, but it's done by everyone, and particularly in poor households. It's done by anyone who's there, whether it be a child, a man, or a woman. And so I think really making sure that we take an intersectional approach and think about various types of oppression, whether it's by race, sexuality, gender identity, or gender, is really important. And so in terms of participatory justice, we have to ensure that we're rebalancing our focus. I think we're all acknowledging that the focus of climate change discourse and work so far has been very much like technical, scientific. Not enough has been dedicated to understanding local, context-based kind of expertise. And so we really need to shift that balance and say, actually, we want, it's all the same to say we'll have the same number of people from different sectors, but actually what we need to do for a truly participatory justice is to actually highlight those who've been excluded and marginalized. So almost having more of more representation from those groups than any others, I think would be an empowering move for women and everyone. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Excellent. Thanks, Julia. Kumi, I see you back in 30 seconds. How do you empower women as climate leaders?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I think the point was made earlier about the critical need of information and knowledge and skills. I think we need to invest in that in a very, very serious way. And I would say that overall, for the overall climate struggle, for everybody, we need to recognize that the biggest reason we are failing is the fact that we cannot communicate with in an accessible way, in all the urgency and the complex changes that we need to make. So I think that's the really where big investments need to be made to create an enabling environment for women to participate. But lastly, I would say it's really about just creating also a context where we respect people's cultures and therefore, and how we communicate. And therefore, I would just conclude with an example that if you look at the recently launched Rikirik Foundation, the name of the foundation is the Rikirik Foundation for the Promotion of Artivism, which is saying we need to bring arts, culture, and activism together, and in a way of being respectful of the multiple cultures we have globally and in our own country, and to try to speak to people not only through rational arguments, but also speak to people through their hearts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kumi. Dora, 30 seconds, please.
No, thank you so much. I think the way that we can empower women is one is by empowering ourselves, just to be able to understand how we engage with women, to be able to go where they are, understand the issues that they are facing, so that we can craft interventions that are speaking to the challenges that they are facing, and actually incorporate some of the solutions that they are already piloting and take them to full scale. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Dora. Thandiwe.
Thank you. I think it's a bit of an upside down question for me, simply because the women have always been there, but have we been listening? We recently commemorated Women's Day, the largest march gathered by women in our country to struggle against apartheid. The Women's Charter was intersectional in 1954, 20 years before the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women was established in the late 1970s. So we've always had our solutions, and we've always been in the forefront of understanding how various forms of oppression intersect. The challenge has become, though, to what extent are women's voices incorporated in our policy-making spaces? And how do we perpetuate patriarchy within our spaces? How do we perpetuate exclusion within our spaces? So it really becomes incumbent on the people making the choices as to who they're going to include and exclude. The responsibility, I think, rests with those in positions of power. And yes, it requires us in positions of privilege to let go a bit and allow people who are actually affected by these changes to make the decisions on their own terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Thandiwe. Dr. Rebecca. Dr. Rebecca, are you still with us? Doesn't seem so. Matthews.
Thanks, Mbali. Mine is going to be simple. If women are the guardians of the future, it simply means that we need to learn from them. We need to take the indigenous knowledge from our grandmothers, and we need to provide support with respect. There's nothing that is going to empower women if support and respect of their initiatives is not there. I think we need to get rid of this attitude. I heard somebody at some stage you said some colonialists came and they saw and they conquered. I think this is what we need to do as officials, get rid of that attitude. We should not go to communities, especially women. We see them with their initiatives and we want to drag them to where we want to take them to. So support and respect. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthews. Last but not least, Rabalani.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. I think my last parting shot is we really need to just ensure that we forge partnerships between government, private sector, academia, and really create opportunities for women in the green economy space. That is your energy, water resilience space, technology innovation, ensuring that we create economic opportunities, and also employability through skilling, upskilling from early childhood, university and post-tertiary education. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rabalani. And thank you, everyone. Thank you to our esteemed panelists who spent the last 2 hours giving us practical actions around the just transition and gender inclusion. The PCC is running a series on dialogues such as this. This was just the first. Please do follow us on social media, go onto our website, sign on to the mailing list to find out more about the events. Thank you so much to our guests and our participants as well. We look forward to continuing this conversation and coming up with more meaningful and practical actions going forward. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mbali, and thanks to everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot. Goodbye.